The sun was sinking low over the horizon, spilling blood red and gold across the jagged cliffs that cut through the endless plains. The wind, sharp and cold, whipped through the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of dust, sagebrush, and something more foreboding, smoke, perhaps, from a distant fire, or the faint stench of decay. The plains, in their vast and empty beauty, were silent witnesses to a struggle few would survive. On the ground, half hidden among the uneven terrain, a man lay crumpled, blood seeping through his shirt, his breath shallow and uneven. This was Jack Carter, a cowboy known in the small settlements scattered across the frontier for his skill with a rifle, his calm hand in a fight, and his stubborn independence. Jack's life had always been one of motion, riding from ranch to ranch, breaking horses, delivering cattle, and occasionally acting as an informal lawman when trouble threatened innocent settlers. Yet all his experience, all his years surviving dust storms, gunfights, and stampeding herds had brought him to this singular, terrifying moment, helpless, wounded, and alone. The injury was severe, a deep slash across his left shoulder from a knife-wielding bandit who had ambushed him while he was attempting to stop a small gang from raiding a nearby homestead. The pain was relentless, a white-hot, stabbing agony that pulsed with every heartbeat. His hand shook as he tried to stem the flow of blood, but it was useless. The wound was too deep, and his strength was ebbing fast. His vision blurred with dizziness, each blink revealing a shifting panorama of golden plains fading into gray dusk. The wind bit at his exposed skin, chilling him to the bone, and he shivered violently despite the heat of his exertion. Jack had always prided himself on his independence, on the notion that he could face any danger alone. Now, lying on the unforgiving ground, he realized the bitter truth. Survival was no longer his choice. His eyes closed briefly as he thought of the people he had left behind. Friends, neighbors, and perhaps a woman he would have called his own someday. But all that seemed distant, unreachable. The howl of a wolf echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder that the wilderness did not care for human pride or desperation. Jack's consciousness wavered, slipping closer to the darkness that threatened to claim him. It was then that she appeared, a huli, an Apache woman known among her people for her courage, skill, and unwavering sense of honor. A huli had been traveling through the plains that day, tracking a herd of deer and collecting medicinal herbs from the wild. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had grown up in this harsh land, every step deliberate, every movement attuned to the rhythm of nature. Her eyes, dark and sharp, noticed the faint trail of blood leading from the canyon where the skirmish had occurred. Most would have ignored it, turned back to avoid danger, but not a huli. She approached cautiously, knowing the risks, yet driven by a sense of duty she could not ignore. When she reached Jack, he barely reacted. His face was pale, sweat mixed with blood streaking down his forehead, his chest rising and falling unevenly with each shallow breath. He was half-conscious, barely aware of the presence that had entered his world. A huli knelt beside him, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. The wound, she realized, was serious but not immediately fatal. With quick, precise movements, she removed her sash, fashioning it into a tourniquet to slow the bleeding. Her hands were steady, her touch firm yet gentle, as she pressed a clean piece of cloth into the wound. Jack stirred, groaning weakly. His pride, that stubborn refusal to show weakness, clashed violently with his need for help. I can manage," he muttered, attempting to push her away. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but there was an unmistakable strain of fear beneath it. The realization that he might not survive the night alone was a bitter pill to swallow. A huli looked down at him, her expression unyielding. "You cannot," she said simply, her voice soft but resolute, carrying the weight of command and compassion simultaneously. "I will not let you die alone." Her words were like an anchor in the storm of his pain, a lifeline that forced him to confront the truth he had tried so desperately to deny. For the first time in hours, Jack's defiance faltered. He allowed himself to relax slightly, letting her tend to him, though not without lingering suspicion and prideful hesitation. She moved quickly, her every action a mixture of efficiency and care. She tore strips from her own clothing to pad the wound further, applied herbal poultices she had gathered, and whispered calming words to him, assuring him that he was not alone. The harsh wind continued to blow across the plains, but a huli's presence created a small sanctuary, a space where survival felt just a little more possible. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Jack's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and the thin shirt he wore offered little protection against the cold, Ahuli noticed immediately. With a swift motion, she removed her own blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, sharing what little warmth she could offer without compromising her own safety. Her actions were practical, but they carried an intimacy, a silent acknowledgement of the shared human experience in the face of mortal danger. The silence between them was punctuated only by Jack's uneven breathing and the occasional cry of a distant animal. Despite his pride and instinct to push her away, he began to notice her presence not as an intrusion but as a lifeline. Her calm competence, her refusal to let him die, created a strange sense of safety in a world that had until now seemed merciless. He realized with a flicker of reluctant gratitude that survival might indeed be possible, not because of his own skill, but because of hers. Ahuli's gaze was steady as she observed him, her mind already working out the next steps. The plains were dangerous at night, and even a partially stabilized wound could turn fatal if he remained exposed. Predators prowled, and the cold could kill as surely as blood loss. She would need to move him to a safer location, perhaps even ride him out to her village or to a place where he could receive proper care. But first she needed to ensure he remained conscious and stable long enough to make the journey. "You need to stay awake," she murmured. "Talk to me anything. Keep your mind busy, your body alert. I will not let you go, Jack. Not tonight." Her words were deliberate, each one reinforcing her resolve and his fragile connection to life. He looked up at her, eyes dim with pain but slowly beginning to focus, realizing that his fate was no longer entirely in his hands. He had lived a life of independence, but now he was learning a lesson in reliance, in the courage of another who chose to risk everything for him. This moment, small as it might seem to an outsider, was monumental. It established the moral center of the story. Courage is not only the act of facing danger, but also the act of refusing to abandon another in their moment of need. Ahuli's bravery, skill, and empathy created a dynamic in which Jack's survival was possible, laying the groundwork for the bond that would deepen as they faced more challenges together. By the time the stars began to puncture the dark sky, Jack was breathing more steadily, stabilized for the moment by Ahuli's ministrations. The wind had not ceased, nor had the threat of predators or the cold, but a fragile hope had been kindled. He was alive, and it was because of her intervention. The Apache woman had entered his life in the harshest of circumstances, refusing to allow him to face death alone. In that night, surrounded by the vast and indifferent plains, a seed of trust was planted, a trust that would grow into a connection forged by shared peril, mutual respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of human vulnerability. By the end of this first act, the reader is fully immersed in the peril of the frontier, the danger of Jack's wound, and the quiet heroism of Ahuli. The stage is set for their journey together, moving through the wilderness, confronting external threats, and navigating the tension and eventual intimacy that arises when two lives intersect under life-threatening circumstances. The story has established stakes, setting, character, and emotional tension, all essential for the next phase of the narrative. The night had deepened into a velvet black, punctuated only by the silver gleam of stars and the faint glow of a crescent moon. The plains stretched endlessly, vast and indifferent, hiding both danger and sanctuary in their folds. Jack Carter lay semi-conscious on the rough ground, bandaged and stabilized by Ahuli's quick thinking, yet still vulnerable. Every shallow breath he took reminded him of his fragility, of how easily life could slip away in these merciless lands. Ahuli knew that leaving him exposed on the ground, no matter how well she had tended his wound, was a gamble. Predators prowled these plains, and human threats were not absent. Bandits often roamed the wilderness at night, preying on travelers in isolated homesteads. Wolves and coyotes could smell blood from miles away, and the cold, sharp, and penetrating would sap Jack's strength even further. Her mind worked quickly. He cannot remain here, she thought. He will not survive the night alone. She scanned the horizon for movement, then lifted Jack carefully into her arms. He was heavier than she expected, but her training and strength allowed her to support him. Every movement was deliberate. She shifted her weight, pressed him close to her chest to preserve his warmth, and whispered soothing words to keep him conscious. Jack, still partially in shock, could barely comprehend the magnitude of her actions. What are you?" he stammered, his voice weak, his pride warring with the relief that surged through him. "Shh," Ahuli said softly, pressing a finger to his lips. Do not speak too much. Save your strength. I will get you to safety. Safety in these lands was not easily defined. Ahuli led him toward a distant ridge she knew to be sparsely patrolled by her people, a place where they could rest briefly and plan the next stage of their journey. She had memorized the terrain since childhood, every ridge, river, and grove of trees a potential haven or obstacle. Tonight, the skills she had honed for survival in these unforgiving plains would determine whether a stranger, a man she had just met, lived or died. The journey was agonizingly slow. Jack's injuries made movement painful. Each step, each shift of weight sent shockwaves of pain through his shoulder. Yet Ahuli bore him tirelessly, adjusting his position, murmuring words of encouragement. Her presence was a constant anchor, a combination of strength and reassurance that slowly chipped away at Jack's stubborn pride. He began to realize that surrendering to her care was not weakness but the only path to survival. As they moved, the cold became their relentless companion. Jack's teeth chattered and his skin burned with fever from the blood loss and exposure. Ahuli shared what little warmth she could, pressing him close against her body and wrapping him in blankets she had carried. Her movements were careful, mindful of his wound, yet there was an intimacy in the way she tended him, small gestures that communicated not only care, but respect. She did not pity him nor treat him as fragile. She treated him as a human in need, worthy of life and dignity. The first real threat came as a distant howl. A pack of coyotes drawn by the scent of blood began circling near the ridge. Ahuli's instincts took over. She scanned the horizon, assessed the distance to cover, and adjusted their path to avoid the predators. Her movements were silent and fluid, almost ghost-like in their precision. Jack, feeling helpless and in awe, could only follow her lead, trusting her judgment even when every nerve in his body screamed that he was vulnerable. The night stretched on, each minute an eternity. Jack struggled not just with physical pain but with a creeping panic, the fear that the world was vast, uncaring, and he was utterly alone without her. But Ahuli's presence was steadying. She spoke in low, calm tones, telling him stories of her people, of the plains and the creatures that inhabited them, of survival and honor. Her words were not merely distraction, they were lifelines grounding him, keeping his mind alert and preventing him from slipping into unconsciousness. In the stillness between her words, Jack found himself observing her. Ahuli's face, illuminated by the faint moonlight, was serene yet determined, her eyes reflecting both intelligence and compassion. He had faced death alone before, but never had he encountered someone who moved with such quiet confidence, someone whose presence made the terror of the wilderness seem manageable. Slowly, a sense of trust began to replace his fear. He realized that survival was no longer solely dependent on his own skill or stubborn will. It was shared, born out of another's courage and knowledge. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes in the distorted perception of pain and exhaustion. Finally, Ahuli led them to a small copse of trees near a rocky outcrop. It was not sanctuary, but it offered concealment and a chance to rest. She laid Jack down gently, unwrapping the tourniquet for a moment to check the wound. The bleeding had slowed, though it would require proper treatment soon. She tended to him with meticulous care, applying herbal salves she had gathered earlier and securing the wound to prevent further bleeding. Jack, barely able to lift his head, whispered a shaky, "Thank you." Ahuli smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You would do the same for me," she replied. There was no arrogance in her tone, only a quiet acknowledgement that helping another was not an extraordinary act. It was simply what one did in the face of life and death. As they rested, the bond between them began to form. It was not love yet, not even friendship fully realized, but a foundation of trust and shared vulnerability. Jack had never relied on anyone like this before, and the realization was humbling. Ahuli, for her part, observed him with the calm discernment of someone who knew that trust must be earned and maintained, even in the briefest of encounters. She saw the flicker of courage returning to him, the gradual acceptance that he could survive, not alone, but together with her. Their conversation remained sparse. Words were secondary to the rhythm of survival, yet in the small exchanges, the touch of her hands adjusting the blankets, the gentle brush of her fingers as she applied the herbal salve, the quiet acknowledgement of his pain, there was communication. It was the language of empathy and courage, Of two souls navigating peril together, Jack realized that the world, vast and indifferent as it was, contained pockets of humanity and that this woman embodied it fully. As dawn approached, the first hints of pale light brushing the horizon, Ahuli prepared them for the next phase of their journey. The cold would intensify, and the terrain would become more treacherous. Jack, now partially recovered, understood that he had no choice but to continue following her lead. The act of relying on someone else, of surrendering his pride to the necessity of survival, was difficult, but also strangely liberating. He felt a faint glimmer of gratitude, humility, and even admiration for the woman who had refused to let him die alone. In that quiet dawn, the plains seemed less hostile, not because danger had disappeared, but because trust had been forged in the crucible of necessity. Jack's life, once teetering on the edge, was now tethered not only to his own will to survive, but to the courage, skill, and compassion of Ahuli. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, he understood that survival was not a solitary endeavor, and that sometimes the greatest strength lay in accepting help from someone who refused to abandon you. By the end of this outline, the stage is set for deeper challenges, not only the physical obstacles of the frontier, but also the emotional dynamics of two people thrown together by circumstance, whose trust and eventual bond will become central to the story. The reader witnesses not just the fight for life, but the subtle beginnings of a relationship forged in danger, respect, and shared humanity. The sun had climbed higher into the sky, casting harsh light across the plains and turning the rugged terrain into a maze of shadows and sun-drenched rocks. Jack Carter, still weak from his wound and the exhausting night-long journey, relied heavily on Ahuli to navigate the vast expanse. His shoulder throbbed with relentless pain, every movement a reminder of how close he had come to death. Yet he had survived the night thanks to Ahuli's skill, courage, and unwavering attention. Despite his pride, Jack could no longer deny that his survival depended entirely on her. Ahuli, ever vigilant, led him along a narrow path that wound through rocky outcroppings and scattered groves of trees. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, noting every movement, every distant shadow that might indicate danger. She had taught herself to read the subtle cues of the wilderness, the rustle of leaves in unnatural patterns, the sudden silence of birds, the distant echo of hooves or footsteps. The plains were beautiful, but they were also merciless, hiding threats that could strike at any moment. Jack, exhausted and weak, struggled to keep up. His breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps as he leaned heavily on Ahuli for support. I can keep going," he said, attempting to mask the pain and fatigue in his voice. But Ahuli shook her head firmly. "No," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You conserve your strength. We move together carefully. One wrong step and we risk everything." Her words were not just practical, they carried authority and reassurance, instilling a sense of security in Jack that he had not felt in years. The journey seemed interminable. Every hour brought new challenges. Rocky terrain that threatened to twist an ankle, hidden crevices and sudden drops, and the constant fear of predators. Jack had faced danger before, but the relentless vigilance required to survive alongside Ahuli, moving through an unpredictable wilderness while injured, was a new and humbling experience. He began to realize that surviving with another person was entirely different from surviving alone. It demanded coordination, trust, and an almost instinctive awareness of the other's needs and capabilities. Then, without warning, danger struck. From the ridge above, the sharp twang of a bowstring broke the tense silence. Jack barely had time to flinch as an arrow whizzed past, embedding itself into a tree mere inches from his head. His heart leaped into his throat. Ahuli reacted immediately. She grabbed him, pulling him low behind a cluster of boulders. Her movements were fluid, instinctive, the result of years of training in hunting, tracking, and warfare. She pressed herself against him, whispering sharply, "Stay low. Do not move unless I tell you." Her voice was firm, commanding, and in it Jack found the strange comfort of certainty. She knew exactly what to do. From their vantage point, they could see figures moving along the ridge, cloaked in shadow but clearly armed. Bandits, likely the same ones who had ambushed Jack the previous night, were lying in wait, anticipating any travelers who might wander into their trap. Jack's stomach churned with a mix of fear and frustration. His pride wanted to surge, to grab a weapon and fight, but his body refused. Ahuli's calm authority reminded him of the reality. His survival depended not on his ego but on her guidance. Ahuli's mind raced, calculating their options. The bandits outnumbered them, and Jack's injury rendered him nearly useless in a direct confrontation. Escape was the only viable strategy. She whispered a plan. They would use the rocky terrain to their advantage, moving from cover to cover in a zigzag pattern, making it difficult for the bandits to predict their path or aim accurately. Her knowledge of the land was unparalleled, and Jack began to understand that his reliance on her was not just a matter of trust, it was a lifeline. The escape was a harrowing ordeal. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Arrows whistled through the air, striking rocks, trees, and occasionally the ground near them. The danger was immediate and visceral. Each movement carried the risk of death. Jack, despite his pain and exhaustion, obeyed Ahuli without question. He was learning a new form of courage, not the brash, lone wolf courage of his past, but the courage to trust, to act in harmony with another, and to accept guidance even when his instincts screamed defiance. At one point, a particularly close arrow struck the ground so near that dirt and pebbles sprayed across their faces. Jack flinched violently, wincing in pain. Ahuli gripped his arm, her eyes fierce with intensity. "Focus," she hissed. "Every second counts. I will not let you die here, not now, not like this." The words were simple, but the conviction behind them reinforced the bond forming between them. In that moment, Jack realized something profound. Survival was not just about physical endurance, but about connection, trust, and the willingness to rely on someone who refused to abandon you. Hours, or perhaps mere minutes, as time became distorted in the adrenaline-fueled chaos, passed in this tense dance of evasion. Finally, they reached a narrow ravine, a natural choke point that offered both cover and a strategic advantage. Ahuli guided Jack into the shadowed shelter of the ravine, pressing him low against the rocks. She whispered instructions on how to remain silent, how to move with minimal noise, and how to watch the attacker's movements. Every word, every gesture reinforced the reliance Jack had begun to feel. As they crouched there, hidden from view, the tension between them shifted slightly. The fear of immediate death gave way to a quieter, more profound awareness of each other. Jack noticed the way Ahuli's eyes scanned the horizon with unwavering focus, the calm decisiveness in her movements and the subtle, reassuring touches she offered when adjusting his bandages or guiding his steps. He felt a strange mixture of admiration, respect, and an almost unconscious emotional pull toward her. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, fearless yet compassionate, skilled yet patient, commanding yet empathetic. Ahuli, for her part, observed Jack with a combination of caution and curiosity. She noted the flickers of courage in his eyes, the moments when he forced himself to keep moving despite the pain, and the way he gradually began to follow her lead without hesitation. She understood that survival required not just physical skill but mental resilience, and she could sense that Jack possessed both, though he had yet to fully acknowledge it. Their shared ordeal was slowly transforming into mutual respect, a foundation upon which trust and deeper connection could be built. Finally, as the sun rose higher, the bandits began to withdraw, likely frustrated by the unexpected difficulty of their hunt. Ahuli guided Jack out of the ravine, helping him to his feet and supporting his weight. The danger had not passed entirely. The plains were vast and threats could appear at any moment, but for now they had survived. Jack's shoulder throbbed painfully, but he felt a renewed sense of determination. He realized that life, fragile as it was, could be protected, nurtured, and even restored through trust, courage, and partnership. By the end of this ordeal, Jack and Ahuli had not only survived an immediate threat, but had begun to form an unspoken bond, forged under the harshest of conditions. The physical journey across the plains had become a metaphor for emotional growth. Jack learned the necessity of relying on another, while Ahuli recognized the strength of his resilience and determination. Together they had faced danger, navigated the chaos of life and death, and emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. After the harrowing escape from the bandits, Jack Carter and Ahuli finally reached a secluded alcove nestled within a cluster of rocky hills. The sun was high in the sky, warming the rugged terrain, but the plains remained unwelcoming, harsh, and unforgiving. Here, hidden from prying eyes, they found temporary refuge, a small natural shelter protected from wind, partially shaded, with a trickling stream nearby. For the first time since Jack's wounding, there was a chance to pause, to rest, and to face not only physical recovery, but the emotional and psychological toll of the events they had endured. Ahuli immediately set to work, arranging their surroundings for safety and comfort. She checked the edges of the alcove for potential dangers, ensuring that no wild animals or hostile humans could approach unnoticed. Then, with meticulous care, she helped Jack sit on a flat rock, gently inspecting his shoulder and unwrapping the bandages to assess the wound's condition. His arm throbbed painfully and a dull ache radiated through his chest, but the worst of the bleeding had been stopped. Ahuli applied a fresh poultice, wrapping it securely with strips of cloth, and spoke softly as she worked. "You've been through a lot," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying an undertone of concern. "You must rest. The wound will only heal if you allow your body to recover." Jack, leaning against the rock, stared at the horizon. The plain stretched endlessly before him, a sea of golden grass and jagged stone. "Rest, easier said than done," he muttered, his pride still fighting against the vulnerability forced upon him. He was a man who had always prided himself on independence, on handling danger alone, yet here he was, relying entirely on another person for his survival. That realization gnawed at him, stirring both frustration and an unfamiliar gratitude. Ahuli noticed the tension in his jaw, the way he shifted uncomfortably despite her gentle guidance. She sat beside him, close enough to offer warmth and support, but careful not to overstep the delicate boundaries of propriety. "You've carried a heavy burden, Jack," she said softly. "Not just the wound, but the pride that tells you must face danger alone. It's natural to struggle with that, but you are not alone now. And that is not weakness, it is life." Her words resonated with him, though he could not yet admit it. The vulnerability he had felt during the night-long journey in the ambush was still raw, but Ahuli's calm presence and unyielding competence began to ease the constant tension coiling in his muscles. For the first time since the attack, Jack allowed himself to breathe deeply, letting the adrenaline and fear slowly recede. As he rested, Jack observed Ahuli. She moved with quiet confidence, her gestures deliberate, her eyes constantly alert yet not anxious. She gathered water from the stream, prepared simple herbs for the wound, and even managed to start a small, controlled fire for warmth. Her actions were efficient, practical, and graceful. Jack felt a mixture of admiration and something more profound, an emotional pull he could not yet name. He had spent his life among rugged landscapes and rough men, but never had he encountered someone like Ahuli, whose strength was tempered with compassion, whose courage did not overshadow her humanity. The hours passed slowly, marked by small tasks and careful movements. Jack nibbled at some dried meat and bread Ahuli had packed, regaining a fraction of his strength. His body still ached, and every movement sent sharp reminders of the previous night's ordeal. Yet amidst the physical discomfort, an internal struggle brewed. He was a man unaccustomed to depending on anyone, especially a woman he had met only hours earlier. Pride, habit, and fear of appearing weak waged war with the gratitude and growing trust he felt toward Ahuli. Ahuli, perceptive as ever, seemed to sense his inner turmoil. She did not press him to speak or reveal his feelings, understanding that trust and emotional openness could not be forced. Instead, she sat quietly nearby, tending the small fire and humming a soft melody native to her people. The sound, gentle and melodic, filled the alcove with warmth and calm. Jack listened, the tension in his chest loosening slightly. There was something in her presence that commanded attention without demanding it, that reassured without diminishing strength. As the day wore on, Jack attempted to help Ahuli gather herbs and small branches for the fire. His movements were slow and cautious, every action tinged with the lingering pain in his shoulder. Ahuli guided him patiently, correcting his stance, showing him which herbs would aid his recovery and how to avoid poisonous plants. The subtle intimacy of shared labor, the gentle touches of guidance, and the shared focus on survival began to erode the emotional barriers Jack had erected. He realized that he could trust her completely, not only with his life but with his fear, his pain, and his pride. Despite the calm, the wilderness outside remained a looming threat. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, every distant howl reminded them that danger was never far. Ahuli remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, alert to movement, while Jack learned to watch alongside her. It was a subtle, unspoken lesson in interdependence. Survival was not just physical but also mental and emotional, requiring constant awareness, trust, and coordination. As evening approached, the first hints of color painted the sky, gold, pink, and deep violet blending into the approaching night. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the dusk. Ahuli sat close to Jack, ensuring he stayed warm, and offered him a simple meal of dried meat and berries. He ate slowly, savoring the nourishment, but more importantly, he savored the sense of companionship that had begun to replace the crushing loneliness of the past 2 nights. Why? Why do you do this? Jack finally asked, his voice low, hesitant. Why help a stranger? Ahuli looked at him, her expression calm yet filled with quiet intensity. Because it is the right thing to do, she replied simply. Because no one deserves to die alone if it can be prevented. And because courage is not only in facing danger, it is in protecting life even when it is not your own. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of courage in that way. To him, courage had always been about standing alone, facing whatever came at him with grit and determination. Yet now he saw that true courage could also mean vulnerability, trust, and the willingness to accept help when it was offered. In that moment, he realized that Ahuli's courage was not just physical, it was moral, emotional, and profoundly human. Night fell fully, bringing with it the chill of the plains. Jack huddled close to Ahuli, wrapped in blankets she had provided, feeling warmth seep into his aching muscles. Their proximity was unavoidable, dictated by necessity, yet it carried a strange comfort. The shared danger, the shared survival, and the subtle emotional connection created a bond neither had expected. Jack's pride wrestled with the growing awareness of attraction, admiration, and respect he felt for her, while Ahuli noted the flickers of vulnerability and trust emerging from the man she had saved. They did not speak much, for words were often unnecessary. The quiet companionship, punctuated by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind across the plains, spoke volumes. Jack felt a sense of peace he had not known in years, a rare and precious gift in the harsh and unforgiving frontier. He realized that this moment of refuge, though temporary, was pivotal. It was a chance to recover, to reflect, and to acknowledge the humanity that had been rekindled by Ahuli's courage and compassion. By the end of the night, Jack's wound had been tended, his body rested as much as possible, and his mind had begun to reconcile with the emotional turmoil stirred by the events of the past days. Ahuli's presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that survival was not merely about physical endurance, but also about trust, empathy, and connection. In the temporary safety of the alcove, amidst the wilderness that had threatened death at every turn, a profound shift had occurred. 2 strangers, thrown together by fate and danger, had begun to form a bond forged in trust, shared hardship, and mutual respect. The dawn was pale and fragile, washing the vast plains in muted shades of gray and gold. Jack Carter and Ahuli had survived the night in their rocky alcove, their wounds tended and their bodies somewhat rested. Yet even as the morning mist lifted from the grass and jagged cliffs, the sense of relief was short-lived. The wilderness offered no permanent refuge. Danger lurked in every shadow, hostile bandits, unpredictable predators, and the unforgiving terrain itself. This morning would demand more from them than any night before. Jack flexed his shoulder carefully, testing the wound. It throbbed sharply, a persistent reminder of the skirmish that had nearly claimed his life. He was stronger than yesterday, but far from fully recovered. His pride urged him to push forward, to reclaim some semblance of independence, yet he instinctively knew he could not do this alone. Every glance at Ahuli reminded him that she had saved his life twice now, once from injury, once from ambush, and that their survival hinged on trust, strategy, and shared courage. Ahuli had already been moving at first light. She assessed the terrain with practiced precision, plotting a route that avoided open plains and favored concealment through ravines, groves, and rocky outcroppings. She understood the dangers better than Jack, and her mind moved constantly, calculating, anticipating, preparing. Yet she did not rush. She understood that haste, in the fragile state they were both in, could be fatal. Every movement, every instruction she gave, was designed to balance survival with preservation of Jack's strength. Their path led them toward a narrow canyon, a place that offered both shelter and strategic advantage, but also carried risks. From high vantage points above, hostile eyes could spot them easily, and the canyon walls amplified sound, making stealth difficult. As they approached, Ahuli's eyes narrowed. She spotted a faint disturbance in the dust, a sign that bandits, perhaps alerted by their previous encounter, had moved ahead to intercept them. The realization hit like a cold wind. The final trial was upon them. "Jack," she whispered, her voice sharp but calm, "we must move quickly and carefully. Follow my lead. Trust me completely." Jack nodded, swallowing the tight knot of fear in his throat. He had learned trust the hard way over the past 2 days, and now there was no room for hesitation. His body ached. His shoulder pulsed with pain, but adrenaline and determination surged through him. Survival demanded that he push past discomfort and rely entirely on Ahuli's skill and judgment. The bandits emerged first as shadows against the canyon's far walls, crude weapons glinting in the morning sun. Their numbers were greater than the previous night and their intent unmistakable. This was not a chance encounter. They were hunting. Ahuli assessed quickly, scanning the canyon for cover, escape routes, and natural choke points. She whispered instructions to Jack on how to move silently, how to anticipate the bandits' positions, and how to use the environment to their advantage. Each word reinforced the fragile trust Jack had come to place in her. The confrontation was immediate and harrowing. Jack followed Ahuli's lead, crouching behind rocks, moving with slow precision and staying low to avoid detection. His heart pounded with fear and exertion, yet he felt a strange exhilaration. He was alive, relying on another, yet fully engaged in the fight for survival. Ahuli moved beside him, fluid and lethal, using her knowledge of the land to maneuver around the bandits and strike from unexpected angles. Her courage was magnetic, inspiring Jack to act with clarity and precision despite his injuries. An arrow whizzed past, narrowly missing Jack's head. He flinched but remembered Ahuli's instructions. Control his breathing, focus on movement, anticipate the enemy. They moved together almost instinctively, a synchronized unit forged by 2 days of shared danger. The bandits, frustrated by their inability to pin down the pair, attempted to outflank them. But Ahuli had already anticipated this. She guided Jack to a narrow ledge along the canyon wall, where the bandits' numbers were less of an advantage. There, using the terrain, they managed to neutralize the immediate threat, knocking a few bandits off balance, creating confusion and forcing a retreat. Jack's shoulder burned, his legs trembled, yet he felt a surge of triumph. They had survived the final, most dangerous confrontation, not by brute strength alone, but by strategy, trust, and coordination. Ahuli's calm leadership, coupled with Jack's determination and growing competence, had carried them through. For the first time in his life, Jack felt the power of partnership, of shared courage, and of trust fully realized. After the immediate danger passed, they moved to a small clearing nearby, safe for the moment. Both were exhausted. Jack's body screamed for rest, and even Ahuli showed subtle signs of fatigue. Yet there was a quiet exhilaration between them. They had faced life and death together, relied on each other completely, and emerged not just alive, but stronger for the experience. Ahuli tended to Jack's wound again, cleaning and reapplying poultice while he sat in the shade of a tree. Jack, still catching his breath, studied her. He realized that the bond between them had deepened far beyond mere survival. There was an unspoken respect, an emotional intimacy, a recognition that they had seen each other at the extremes of fear and courage. Jack's pride, which had once made him insist on facing danger alone, now softened. He recognized that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that trust could be a form of courage, and that love, or at least a profound emotional connection, could blossom even in the harshest conditions. Ahuli, observing him quietly, noticed the change as well. She had seen countless travelers and warriors, but few who learned so quickly the delicate balance between pride, trust, and cooperation. She had risked her own life repeatedly, yet she did not regret it. In Jack, she saw potential not only for survival but for partnership, for mutual respect, and perhaps something deeper. Their shared ordeal had revealed character, resilience, and humanity in ways that words alone could not convey. As they rested, Jack finally spoke, his voice hoarse but earnest. "Ahuli, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, more than once, and I've never met anyone like you." Ahuli smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and determination in her expression. "You are alive because you trusted me when it mattered most. That is all the thanks needed." Courage, Jack, is not in facing danger alone, but in facing it with integrity and the willingness to depend on another. And you have learned that well. The two sat in silence, the fire of shared survival flickering between them. The plains around them, though still vast and unforgiving, seemed slightly less intimidating. They had faced the ultimate trial together, and in doing so had forged a bond stronger than fear, stronger than distance, and stronger than the harsh environment itself. In that moment, Jack understood something profound. Life was no longer about solitary survival or rugged independence. Life was about connection, courage, and the people who chose to stand by you even when the world was indifferent. Ahuli had chosen to stand by him, to risk everything, and in doing so had transformed his understanding of strength, trust, and love. By the end of the day, their bond was undeniable. They had survived injuries, ambushes, and the relentless wilderness together. They had tested and affirmed their trust, courage, and resilience. The plains, vast and indifferent, had witnessed the emergence of something rare and powerful, a connection forged in the crucible of life and death, tempered by mutual respect and deep emotional understanding. The final trial had not only ensured their physical survival, but had solidified the emotional and moral foundation of their relationship. The story, which began with one man's struggle to survive alone, had evolved into a tale of shared courage, trust, and the transformative power of human connection. Jack and Ahuli were no longer merely survivor and savior. They were partners in every sense, bound by experience, respect, and the unspoken recognition that they would face whatever came next together.